There was a survey done, and they found that over 50% of Americans have been defrauded. He sold his two businesses to this company, turned over control to them, and they absolutely screwed him. They're running a Ponzi scheme. If you take $70,000 of somebody's money to build a swimming pool and you do nothing, you've committed a crime. If you take $70,000 and you dig a hole and you start the construction of the swimming pool, then...
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Robinson Review. I am joined here with one of my good friends, law school classmates, managing partner of a wonderful firm here in Atlanta named John David Huffman. JD, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Todd. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Awesome. Man, we're gonna chop it up today because JD and I go way back, but we've got a lot to talk about. What I want to get into really with you is the practice of law, what you're doing at your current firm, how you're growing your firm. You're the managing partner, I think, right?
Yeah, co-managing partner with Todd Poole.
Okay, co-managing partner. And I want to hear some war stories. And I know you've got a ton because the area of law that you're focused on, that you've become an expert in, is fraud.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, it's sort of a natural evolution. The first fraud case I ever had was really riveting, about a briefcase full of cash going to New York. Imagine two grown men on their way to New York with a briefcase full of cash that was $80,000. And the belief was they were going to go to Manhattan and make this exchange and in return receive $3 million in return. The background of the scheme was that one of the defendants had a large inheritance coming from an overseas acquaintance.
Okay.
And where that acquaintance lived changed throughout the story, which was one of the interesting facts, like whether it was the UAE or Saudi Arabia or the country that he lived in. And so they needed the $80,000 in order to pay for taxes and transfer fees and other sort of international transfer obligations,
right,
in order to get $3 million, which was the first part of the inheritance,
right,
over to America. And so one of my clients went with one of the defendants to New York with a briefcase that the defendant liked to describe as, it wasn't a briefcase, it was an attaché. That was his thing. And they went to New York, and there was an exchange. There was a third party there. They went to a hotel room. They inspected the briefcase.
Oh my gosh.
They took the briefcase, and my client got hosed. It's probably the most dramatic fraud case I've ever had because, you know, most of the time when you hear about things like that, and I've certainly heard many stories, there's an overseas transfer often, right, and the people that are involved in it are gone.
Right.
I mean, if there is a human-to-human connection, like you actually meet face-to-face, that person disappears.
Right.
They don't hang around. But these guys, you know, one of them lived next door.
You know, I had one at my office, a couple. I mean, doing a lot of real estate transactions, we are a high target for fraudsters.
Yes, you are.
And we get emails all the time of equipment sales. Like, oh, I'm buying a large tractor whenever it says in your area,
yes,
you know it's fraud, right?
Yes.
It's like, and then we always say, go look at the email address and see who it's from. But my law partner, he got duped, and he was like, oh, look, I'm going to handle the sale of this equipment. And like you said, the schemes are getting so sophisticated that I had another case, and I'm thinking about it, where legitimate email. This guy wanted to sue his partner. They were from Canada, but yet they bought a bakery in Atlanta, so they said. And he was going to sue his partner. And what he ended up saying to me, and I sent him an engagement letter. The guy signed it. I was like, okay, great. He was like, look, okay, send him a demand letter. So I sent him a demand letter. The guy wired me $2,500 as a retainer, actual money. It was deposited. I get an email back from the guy I was trying to sue. And he says, look, I'm sorry. I've got half the money now. It was like $40,000. I've got half the money now. I'm going to go ahead and send you a check for $20,000 and just, you know, don't sue me. I'll get the other $20,000 a little bit later. So he sends us a check for $20,000 and legitimate check. It looked completely real. I give it to my controller. She deposits it. She's like, it's a Canadian check. Let's just hang on a minute before you, he was like, and my client was like, wire me the $20,000.
Yes.
That's the scheme, right?
Yes.
And then the check didn't clear, and I ended up I always email these guys in all bold and all caps. I was like, you have been reported to the authorities, even though I don't report them to anybody.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping to scare them a little bit.
Yeah, we've had several schemes like that. attempted and gone to various levels within our firm too. So we had one very similar. They hired us to, basically collect on a debt.
Yeah.
So then we got the check,
Same.
and it was certified, but it wasn't a real check. We deposit it, then they demand the money,
Right.
before the check clears.
Yeah.
So they're trying to get money out of your trust account and then let the check bounce. It's a very common scheme. So put some policies in place. We have one, like for a check, it's got to clear for 10 days.
Yeah.
Before we'll disperse any money.
Yeah. 100%.
And wires, you can do a little faster, but
We had another one where it was the equipment sale. I'm trying to remember the facts, but I think we received a wire. Oh no, maybe it was the same situation. We received a check for like $100,000, and my law partner wired it out before the check cleared. And luckily, we were able to recall the wire back.
right.
But a lot of times with those wires, if you don't catch it,
You got to do it fast.
you got to do it fast.
Yeah, I mean, if maybe within the first 24 hours, but after that, it's
Yeah.
normally gone.
I get questions a lot of like, I want to press charges against this person for committing fraud, right? And I've got to explain a lot of times. Well, there's criminal fraud and there's civil fraud. Like what you just did. Were criminal charges ever pressed with this guy who had the suitcase full of cash?
No, they were not.
So how do you distinguish between the two?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I find you basically have maybe three buckets of cases. One that are clearly in the civil realm, where you're just not going to be able to get there with a criminal application. And then you have clear criminal cases, and then you've got sort of a muddy middle. So
Right.
let me explain. So we had a case where a lady meets a gentleman at a gym. They strike up a friendship. It gets sexual. And then he pitches her on some real estate investing.
Mm.
Now, turns out he never buys the property that he's claiming he's going to buy with her money. And then he tries to sort of extort her with the relationship. And, she had a boyfriend. So it was a little bit dicey. But this case was clearly criminal because there was nothing he bought with the money. So there was no defense like it was a bad deal or something of that nature. So in Georgia and in many other states, you can actually go apply for a civilian warrant, a criminal warrant application. So in any county around Georgia, you can go down and say, I want to swear out a criminal warrant. You write down the description of what happened. They serve the person. You have a probable cause hearing, and the judge will take them into jail right there if the judge finds probable cause.
I didn't really know that. So you don't need to go to a prosecutor
No.
to press charges.
You can go to the police, and if it's
Right.
of enough money, and there's some variety to this, like if you're in a metro area, those are more difficult. Get
Yeah.
out of the metro areas, you can get the police interested. This process in Georgia bypasses the police because it is hard to get. When you've got a contract, the police are like,
Whatever.
it's civil,
Yeah.
which is not true.
Right.
But we've thrown several people in jail, and in Georgia, oftentimes on the way to jail, people will make a deal. So in this particular story that I described, the guy on the other side decided to pay some money. The judge, believe it or not, actually gave him the opportunity to pay money or go to jail.
Wow.
And he said, I'm going to reset the hearing, which may or may not have been proper, but this is what he did. I'm going to reset the hearing in 30 days. If you give her the $55,000, then I'm not going to put you in jail. If you don't, you're going to jail.
And
so
she took out a civilian warrant?
Yeah, we did it on her behalf.
Okay.
And prosecuted it for her, basically. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Wow. That puts a lot of power back into the people.
It does. It's very good when you have a kind of a clear criminal case. And we've
Really,
done it.
what distinguishes between the two?
The complexity of sort of the contractual arrangement and like what happened. So like, let me give you an example in a construction context. If you take $70,000 of somebody's money to build a swimming pool and you do nothing,
Right.
you've committed a crime, arguably, for sure.
Okay.
Now, it's possible you could have gotten really sick or something dramatic could have happened, but that's most likely a crime. If you take $70,000 and you dig a hole and you start the construction of the swimming pool, then whether it's going to be criminal is going to be a lot closer. And it really boils down to like the intent of the person who's doing the activity. It's certainly civil, and you certainly can take that route. So it really depends on how much of the underlying transaction has sort of been completed. And the more that's been completed, the more difficult it is to go a criminal way. We certainly have done both at the same time, though.
Yeah, and there's no prohibition of doing that.
No prohibition against doing it. And a lot of civil lawyers don't know about this process. It's a great process. But when you go through the criminal process, and if they are convicted of the crime, it is a requirement that restitution be ordered in the amount that was owed, which, by the way, in Georgia is defined as what the civil damages would have been without pain and suffering. That's the measure of damages of restitution.
Did you find yourself interested in this area of law upon graduating law school, or did you kind of just stumble into it?
I stumbled into it.
Yeah.
Just case after case. We were doing real estate disputes and business disputes and intellectual property. And what I found really fascinating about it was the sort of psychology behind the con artist. And there's a lot of different psychologies that you see, but it requires a force. If you have two even quasi-reasonable people in a dispute, you normally can reach a resolution over time. I mean, litigation, you start off far apart, and as you know, because your firm and you do some litigation, you build towards sort of a little bit closer perspective, and then the parties sometimes can bridge that gap and often do. When you have a fraud defendant, though, they think they can con the jury just like they've conned other people. And so you tend to be further apart and stay further apart, and you tend to try more cases in this department.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it fascinating to understand these people, just sort of the psychology through the years.
Have you ever represented a defendant charged with fraud?
I have. We don't like to be on that side, but we are sometimes on that side. I mean, if we generally find in our own heart that they've become, if we've convinced ourselves they really are a con and they won't take our advice to settle, we normally get out of the case.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't like, I got to go home and talk to my kids about cases, and they ask me sometimes, well, Dad, what do you do if you're representing the bad guy? It's very simple for them, obviously.
Right,
it's much more nuanced in reality. I tell them to do what's right.
Yeah.
That's my advice. And I think that's our job as counselors, but obviously we have some ethical
But let me ask you this. If you are representing a bad guy like this, a fraudster, but you could win on a technicality, whatever that technicality is, what do you do?
If I feel good about it, I'll win. I mean, I'd like to say that I understand the motive and intent of all my clients, but as you know from representing clients, that's sort of an evolving understanding as a lawyer. But obviously, we represent all of our clients zealously and with the full force of the law.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember in law school, taking the criminal law class and the professor saying, if you're representing a child molester, whether they did it or didn't do it is not the point.
Right.
Right. It was more of it was more of like the point of criminal law is to keep the prosecution at bay.
Right.
To make sure that the prosecution does whatever they need to do to prove their case. And even if it's the smallest technicality, then justice wins, basically.
Right.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your firm, Poole Huffman. I love the story of how you started, because I remember you started working there in law school.
Yes.
As an intern.
I did. Yeah. So I met my law partner when I was in law school and started working with him as an intern my first year of law school out of 3, and worked there during the summers, worked there during school part-time. And then he hired me. And then a couple of years after that, we became partners. I was kind of much junior, and the relationship has evolved since that time. I give a lot of credit to Todd Poole, my partner, because I think, and this is a good principle for anybody that's thinking about business partnerships.
Right.
They don't stay the same. People's lives change, priorities change, commitments change, what they want to do with their lives change. And not that his has changed that much. We've been trying to grow the firm together, but I just say flexibility is important, and the ability to sort of recognize it may not always stay the same. And I give a lot of credit to him. He's been a great partner through the years and been very fair. And we've always, we've had some tough conversations. And in fact, I wouldn't say it was really tough, but we had an important kind of conversation just a few months ago about the future of the firm. And I always recommend you go to a pool with your shirts off and have those tough conversations, because that's what we did. We were out in Vegas at a conference.
Yeah. So. I think a lot of our listeners are real estate investors. What are some types of fraud that you've seen in the real estate investing context?
Yeah, I've seen a lot, and I brought a few notes with me because Want to talk about syndications
Sure.
specifically? I know that's a lot of your listeners are trying to get into syndication. So
Yeah.
I think one of the first things to understand about fraud, right, is that it happens, and it's happening in the real estate world a lot.
Right.
And a lot of people, I have a good friend of mine that I went to college with, and he's a high school teacher. And about once a year, we take a guy's trip with a few other people, and we get in the car, and he asks me about legal cases, and I spin off some that I'm working on.
Yeah.
And he's just shocked that all of this is going on in the world, and he sort of lives in a world in which most people are honest and nobody's going to steal from you.
Right.
But when you start talking about real estate deals and syndications and hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions of dollars, there are people out there that will steal it from you.
Yeah.
And so being aware of it is sort of the first step. But I mean, practically, you see it in inflated projections.
Mm-hmm.
You see it in, there could be misrepresentation of occupancy or expenses, or, you could misrepresent realistic rent growth that's going to go on. Of course, sometimes that could be honest too.
Right.
It's not necessarily always fraudulent. You're going to see the misuse of funds in some of these things. So people aren't disclosing. Sometimes it's an affirmative misrepresentation. Sometimes it's a concealment of the way the funds are going to be used, or you're going to have a related company that they don't disclose doing construction or property management, or you sell a property into the fund at an inflated price. You say, we're buying this apartment complex for $20 million, when in fact you bought it for 17, and
Right.
or your other entity contracted it for 17, and you're flipping it into the deal.
I guess that would be fraudulent potentially to the investors who are
Yes.
buying in at 20 million in that example.
Absolutely. Just a few kind of practical tips when people are investing in general. Watch out for the guarantees. If somebody's guaranteeing you something, that's a big red flag.
Right.
There was a big Ponzi scheme in sort of the Southeast, Florida and Georgia primarily, called drive planning.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was a big Ponzi scheme that they busted just a few months ago. And I talked to maybe half a dozen or a dozen of the investors before the SEC sort of took it over.
Right.
And they guaranteed a 10% return paid quarterly. And the investors were investing in like notes that were supposedly going into real estate. You can't make 10% on a quarterly basis in perpetuity. I mean,
40% a year?
40% a year.
Oh, wow.
So exactly, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, you probably have some rules of thumb, but when you start getting into the 15 plus, especially 20 plus kind of returns, this is red flag for me territory, because you take 10%, just take $1,000 and put 10% on it and click it. In 10 years, it's going to be like $1 trillion or something. I mean, just the math is incredible.
Yeah.
Another piece of advice I would have for people in your world, in the syndication world, is get a lawyer.
Right.
Get a lawyer. I mean, don't you know people that are in the syndication world that may not be honest?
Oh, 100%.
Right. So if a client hires you, somebody who's got experience in it, that itself could save people, because you're like, I know this guy, like he's shady,
And I think the way the market has been in the past couple of years, especially 21, 22, people were making so much money hand over fist in the real estate acquisition space, multifamily and otherwise, because the rates were so low. People were making millions of dollars just putting a deal in a contract and then getting it closed, doing a lot of these flips, doing a lot of kind of shady business within the deal structuring side. And a lot of the lenders are getting tagged now because they're either complicit, or they looked the other way, or they kind of knew what was going on, but they didn't say anything about it. It can be very problematic. Yeah. And even, what have you seen so I know like it's kind of on the investment space, but what about in the actual real estate contracting space, like between buyers and sellers?
Yeah, where we see this the most is just failure to disclose material issues in property. So, you could see somebody buying an office building and the seller doesn't disclose, this foundational issue that they've had with the property. Right. And you see it a lot with homeowners buying and selling real estate. That's where we see it sort of.
But there's some nuance to that though, because the law in Georgia especially is this, caveat emptor, right?
Yes.
Buyer beware.
Yeah.
So how do you distinguish what needs to be disclosed and what doesn't need to be disclosed? Or what is the buyer's responsibility to discover?
Right. So the default law is buyer beware, but the law is also if you know of a latent or undiscoverable issue, you must disclose it. So the law kind of goes down two prongs, and even a lot of civil lawyers don't appreciate this distinction. They think of fraud only as a misrepresentation. You got to say something that's basically you got to lie to
Right.
someone, and somebody's going to rely upon it and be damaged. But there's a whole nother avenue of fraud, and that's fraudulent concealment. So it's when you know of something material and you don't disclose it, that in and of itself, without any representation whatsoever, is also fraud. And so we have cases like this often, and it's often in a home situation where we see it a lot, but we can see it certainly in other situations as well. I mean, I think juries and judges and contracts are much better in commercial settings to protect the seller, but with buyers, I mean, it's good to do diligence, but if you don't disclose, for instance, a rat infestation that I can't discover, or you don't,
So if it's incapable of being discovered,
correct,
then the seller needs to disclose it.
correct.
And what's different in the multifamily context versus the residential context is most purchase and sale agreements for residential properties have a seller disclosure exhibit.
Yes.
And that's where most of that stuff needs to be disclosed, right?
Correct.
You don't have that in multifamily usually, and any other types of commercial real estate. So that's why we rely so heavily on the seller's reps and warranties section of the contract, right?
Yes.
So whenever I'm working on a contract or I'm representing somebody who's buying a property, we will redline the crap out of that section because we're trying to tie the seller down to as many representations and warranties as we can.
Yes.
So that we can rely on that rep later if it turns out to be false, right? So that's often and it's funny if I'm selling a property on behalf of a client,
You're trying to minimize.
I'll put
That's right.
2 or 3 in there, and that's it.
Right. That's right. That's right. And that is a very important section, maybe one of the most important sections of the contract. But even in the midst of all that, and even in the midst of like an as-is clause, if there's something you can't discover and you cover it up or you conceal it or don't disclose it, it can be fraud.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I've come across a couple cases where the information that's provided in the due diligence is fraudulent.
Yes.
Right. So rent rolls can be fabricated.
Yep. Occupancy statistics, which is kind of a rent roll too.
Yeah, yeah. And even like the collections of what the property is making can be false. And so that's why we always ask for bank statements as part of our due diligence. Sellers will just freak out. They're like, I'm not giving you my bank statements. Well, how do I know what you're saying the property collects is actually what it collects? Like, I don't care about your expenses. I don't care if you're paying, your uncle on the side as the maintenance guy for $20,000 a month for doing nothing. But I want to know how much income the property brought in.
Yeah, and you can imagine a situation, for instance, we had a case, and I won't get into the details of it because it's still going on, where somebody bought a triple net building, and the tenant and the landlord had been in prior litigation. And what happened was in the middle of the deal, right as the deal was getting ready to close, the tenant blew up the deal because the tenant was still ticked off. And there was a lot of litigation that came out of this situation, which there really shouldn't have been, but there was. And there was a fraud claim made by the potential buyer against the seller that you didn't disclose this like material adverse relationship that you had. And it's on its way, to a jury. So.
Oh, is it? Wow.
Yeah. So,
wow. Yeah.
Be careful out there.
Yeah.
Get a lawyer. get some guidance.
Get a lawyer and get some guidance. That is certainly the best way. Or listen to podcasts like this so you can kind of educate yourself. So I want to talk a little bit more about the latent defects that buyers can't really discover. I mean, what is that? I mean, it's foundational, I think, for sure. What other kind of latent defects have you seen in the commercial context that buyers can't really discover?
So we've seen foundational issues. You could have like roofing issues, which can be really expensive to fix. You can have environmental issues.
Right, environmental for sure. But I feel like that's buyer's responsibility. Like if the seller owns a property and it's under whatever that program is, like the cleanup program,
right,
it's the buyer's responsibility to get a phase 1. If the buyer chooses not to get a phase 1 environmental assessment, like say it's a seller financing deal, your lender's always going to get one.
Yes.
Right. Lender's always going to get one. Banks are going to require one. But if it's a seller financing deal and it's there's some chemicals in the ground, and usually in a seller financing deal you don't do a phase 1, right? Is in that instance, would you think that could be a potential claim if the seller knew there was some ground contamination?
You know, I haven't looked at it specifically in the context of a seller finance, because
Yeah.
that does change the circumstances, but there could be. I mean, if it's latent and it's material, and I'm not sure that all environmental issues are,
Right.
but you know, most commercial deals, they go get a phase one and they find something, and you know,
Right.
if there is something, they get a phase two. You know, I mean, that's sort of the process. The good thing about commercial deals is there's a lot more money involved, so you can spend the money doing the due diligence.
Right.
The latent issues don't pop up as much.
It's mainly in the residential context.
It's not exclusively, but it
Right.
is mainly there. But you can I guess the point I'm trying to make through the conversation is that failure to disclose can also be fraud.
Right.
And whether if you're putting together a syndication and you think, well, all these, you know, I've put together my PPM, my private placement memorandum, and I've disclosed a bunch of things to them about the deal, but you know, they need to do their own due diligence about the property, but I know about something that's not easily discoverable, like that could be an issue for you. And it's
Yeah.
going to be context dependent, but you know, just be honest.
Be honest.
You know,
It's
so
hard.
like, is a reasonable person going to look at this and go like, you should have told me about this? Like,
Right.
then you need to do it.
So just thinking through again, those that are buying and selling commercial real estate, because you know, in my community's multifamily deal makers, it's a mentorship community where people come in, they pay for the mentorship, join the community of investors, they learn how to grow and scale a real estate portfolio under my guidance and mentorship, and a lot of people look for creative deals, they look for creative structures, right? And I think that can sometimes skirt the line. Especially when, and this is something that I've seen, when a seller reinvests money into the buyer's acquisition vehicle, sometimes that's, maybe you can talk about this, sometimes that's fraud on the bank, right? Because the buyer is presenting a package to the lender saying,
Right.
I'm putting in $1 million, but in fact, the seller's reinvesting $1 million into my deal.
Right.
Have you dealt with any much bank
I've never
fraud?
dealt with a case like that, but it could be fraud to the extent that it's misrepresented what's actually happened. Now, if a seller is going to, you know, take part of the proceeds and make an equity contribution in the buyer,
Right.
I don't see any problem with that. They would just look like any other sort of LP, limited partner,
Right.
you know, in that deal. It's a different deal. I mean, you're doing one deal, you're selling it. You're doing a second deal, they're an investor.
Right.
But if it's some sort of, you know, held second mortgage that's not disclosed, or something that's a little bit under the table, you know, an inflated purchase price, kickback,
Right.
that could become an issue and could be fraud.
Yeah, yeah. What are some things people can do to protect themselves from fraud?
So I always say the first thing is awareness. So fraud cannot happen until trust and control meet. So you think about the story that I told earlier with the gentleman. They trusted their friends. That's why they're smart, they're educated, they're sophisticated people, but they trusted them. And that's how they wind up in this situation. And then they gave them control, ultimately, of the $80,000 that they lost. So when you think about structuring a deal, when control is turned over to someone else, you are trusting them by default. Okay, so what's happening? Are
Right.
you lending money to someone unsecured? I got a lot of cases like that.
Oh yeah.
You know, are you making big advance payments on something that don't make sense? I mean, I listened to your podcast that came out regarding the cryptocurrency and something that you were sort of involved in.
Oh.
Right. And they asked you, and that you go back and you can listen to it, about making an advanced payment.
Yeah.
I mean, you were looking at getting an LP interest for a couple $1 million. They were going to make a fee on it, and they wanted you to pay the fee in advance. And cryptocurrency, which
Yeah.
is another red
There was
flag.
so many red flags in that one.
Yeah. But, you know, paying money in advance, you know, sort of locking it up. My brother, who does some multifamily, called me about a deal a few months ago, and we still argue about whether this was fraud or not, but I think it is. And the investors were going to buy a multifamily building, and they claimed to have international funding for
Right.
it for 100% of the deal. And they were going to pay my brother to put up, it was, I don't know, maybe $1.5 million for like a week or two to show that they had equity, and they were going to get the money back. He was going to get the money
Yeah.
back in a couple of weeks with, you know, like a 15% return.
Right.
And everything about this screamed to me illegitimate. It was international, which is a big red flag. I
Right.
mean, not all international deals are fraudulent, just like not all advance payments, but it's a flag.
Yeah.
It was a high return over 2 weeks, and it was giving somebody else control of money with no security, and none of it lined up.
Daniel thought about doing it?
He thought about doing it, and we still
Yeah.
argue about whether it was legitimate or not, but I still don't think it was. And, I had some real concerns about it. And the more questions I ask, which is another hint, the more questions you ask about it, if the deal shifts,
Yeah.
like I remember asking them a question like, you're going to pay me a 15% return on my money for 2 weeks? And he goes, well, I guess what we mean 15% per annum. And see, that was a shift.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So 15% per annum is like, whatever, like
You
not
just,
much.
yeah. Divide that by 365. It's a lot less.
Right. So the truth doesn't zigzag. It's consistent. And so that's one of the keys. Like when you start asking people,
Right.
if you see a character shift,
Yeah.
you see something that doesn't quite add up. But all those are kind of signs that you're out into something that maybe is
I
not
love
right.
that. I love that. The truth doesn't zigzag.
Yeah, the truth doesn't zigzag.
That's a good one.
Right.
Wait, so I still understand. Daniel was going to put up this $1 million, $1.5 million, and was he going to get a stake in the deal?
He was going to get a stake in the deal, but
Was
he
it-
was going to
was
get
it- was it
all
like-
of the capital back.
Plus the fee, the 15% fee.
Right. Plus the fee.
He was just putting the money up to show like proof of funds, basically.
And that was what was unclear.
Yeah.
As I started to poke around it, it was like proof of funds or equity, but I was like, but you're going to get 100% from this overseas investor to fund the deal. The interest rate on the loan was like at 5%, which at the time was way under market.
Right.
I mean, of course, 100%'s out
Right.
not market either
Right.
on the deal. So there was a lot of sort of red flags that added up. And I remember we talked to these guys over Zoom, and they were like out in Colorado skiing or something at the same time. And I just was like, I don't think so. So
Yeah. Not.
So
Man.
Again, I don't know. I don't
But is
know.
it worth the
100%.
risk? That's the
It's certainly
thing.
not worth the risk to put $1.5 million in somebody
That's
else's
a lot of
hands
money.
and figure it out.
And to show proof of funds, this is something that would be important for people listening. You don't have to send it anywhere. You just have to show it, right? Show your bank statement, send them a copy of this, send them a copy of that. You don't have to send it anywhere for someone to show someone they have proof of funds.
Right. So if they want you to send it to them to show
Right.
proof of funds, then it's fraud.
Then
right?
it's fraud. Then it's absolutely
yeah.
fraud. Leading a team, as I know, is a difficult task.
Yes,
And leading lawyers is definitely a difficult task in and of itself.
it is. They're a special breed.
They're a
us
special
lawyers.
breed. Yeah. What have you done to undertake that?
I've had to learn a lot and
Yeah.
grow a lot. And I think the hardest person to lead is yourself.
Mm.
But if you're going to lead a team, you got to grow yourself. You've got to become better. You got to grow your character. You got to make the hard decisions, because the only way to do it, I think, with longevity is to be authentic and have some modeling in what you're doing.
Right.
And so one of the key principles that I try to live by is to wake up every day and when I go to work and say, how can I add value to my team?
Yep.
What does that look like? Can I encourage them? Can I give them more responsibility? Can I believe in them more? Can I put a tin over their head, as John Maxwell would say, and lead them with authenticity?
Mm.
Which is a servant heart, which is a adding value heart, which is a let them succeed, let them shine.
Right.
So that's the
Because you guys have been in business. I mean, you've been partners for what, 15 years, roughly?
we've been working together
Yeah.
for about 15 years. We've been partners for 11 and a half. Yeah, we want to keep growing, want to keep making a difference in our clients' lives, like to see an office in another state
Yep.
or two in the next couple of years and keep growing from there.
Well, I noticed on the show sheet you're writing a book.
I am.
Tell us about the book.
Mention it. Yes, I'm writing a book on fraud. That's
Oh,
what we're here talking about. So I've got a lot of war stories, a lot of trials, a lot of cases, and it'll be written to the victim of the
Mm.
fraud. So we've got fraud in business cases. I got fraud by a publicly traded company that I dealt with. I've got fraud in real estate deals. I got romance frauds that we've dealt with through the years. But it's written to the victim, because the fraud victim, and believe it or not, there was a survey done by IPX, and they found that over 50% of Americans have been defrauded. I've been defrauded. I don't know
Really?
if you've been defrauded. If you think about it for a minute, maybe you have, and it hasn't been
Right.
so big that it's. But the number one emotion people have when they are defrauded is a feeling of shame, and like I'm such an idiot to fall for this.
Right.
And part of my message in writing the book, because I've dealt with a lot of victims, is to realize that anyone can fall for this.
Right.
You're not stupid. You're not overly gullible. You're not. You should not have the shame associated with it because you just trusted someone. And we all do this. We
Right.
trust people and we give control to people all the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean we can't be more prudent or wise about it. But in many of the situations that my clients find themselves in, I don't know that I nor anyone else would have been able to prevent it.
Right.
Quick story.
Yeah.
I got a client. He was selling his businesses to IT companies to another company. They're publicly traded. With
The purchaser's publicly traded?
yeah,
Okay.
with auditors.
Okay.
They're running a Ponzi scheme.
Wow.
And he sold his two businesses to this company, turned over control to them, and they absolutely screwed him. And we wound up and got a $9 million racketeering verdict against these, not only the company, but the CFO and the CEO. So you got a husband and wife, like Bonnie and Clyde,
Yeah.
colluding to defraud people out there. And it actually wasn't the first time they'd done that. And I mean, who could see that, right?
Yeah. Right.
But that's the way clients feel. And so that's part of my message in writing the book, is to try to show people that have been victims of this, that you're not alone. There's
Right.
a lot of other victims, and here's a pathway out of it from a legal perspective.
Did you collect on that $9 million judgment?
We've collected some, but not all of it. We're
Really?
still working on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
John David, thanks so much for coming by and joining us today on the Robinson Review. If people want to get in touch with Poole Huffman or you individually, where can they find you?
Sure. So our law firm, you can find us at wefightfearlessly.com, or you can go to my website at johndavidhuffman.com.
All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Robinson Review. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you're interested in learning more about multifamily deal makers and joining a community of investors to learn how to grow and scale your real estate portfolio, make sure to find us online.